Well, it was a busy night for primaries in 5 states, but the big ones to watch were key races in Georgia, with each resulting in resounding victories. Incumbent Governor Brian Kemp celebrated winning by more than 50 points in his Republican primary over former President Trump-endorsed David Perdue. This win sets up a rematch of the 2018 gubernatorial election with Democrat Stacey Abrams. In the GOP Senate primary, however, Trump-endorsed Herschel Walker won easily. Walker will now face off with Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock, who won his seat in a special election last year. And in what was expected to be a tight race for the GOP nomination for Secretary of State, incumbent Brad Raffensperger won big over Trump-endorsed Jody Hice. And Brad Raffensperger joins me now. Secretary, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. So you won very handily in your election, not only statewide, but also you bested your challengers in a district where Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene won. So how do you make sense of winning in the same place that someone who made these unfounded claims about election fraud a central issue in her campaign?
Good evening, Caitlin. Well, I've been traveling all over the state. In fact, I was up in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district several times. I've been to LJ in North Georgia 3 times, talking to Tea Party groups, the Republican Party group, and then the business chamber group. So been very active up there. And then been to South Georgia. I've traveled all over the state for over a year now to Rotary groups, chamber groups, whatever group would invite me in, explaining what happened in the election of 2020, and then also explaining about the Election Integrity Act. I told people with the Election Integrity Act of 2021 that is not going to decrease turnout. And now look what we just did. We did our primary. We had 1.9 million voters show up. That's a record for a primary election. In fact, yesterday we had 1 million people show up. That's virtually the same as what we had back in 2018 in the November race. And this is a primary. So we've shown that it's easy to vote in Georgia, but we have the appropriate guardrails for voting.
And you endured some intense criticism from former President Trump. We all know the story. He backed your opponent for largely insisting that Georgia's 2020 presidential election results were fraudulent. So what does beating Jody Hice mean to you?
Well, it means that I leaned into not the polls, but into the people. And I knew that my fellow Georgians are good people. I just need to get out there and explain to them, these are the data points. This is exactly what happened. When I gave them the truth, the facts, then they've responded, and they've responded huge. And I just believe that people are basically good. And we saw that people aren't just basically good in Georgia. People are wonderful.
But the fact that you won, the fact that Brian Kemp won over Trump-endorsed candidates, I mean, what does that suggest about that dynamic?
I think it means that we have a unified team now, and we're going to be moving forward as the Republican Party. We have some great candidates. But I think one of the reasons we had such huge turnout was probably a lot of the national issues. You look at 8.5% inflation, look at gas that's over $4 a gallon, heading to $6, they say, by the summertime. Those issues are really hurting everyone's pocketbooks. And so I think that's really one of the reasons that voters are so energized also.
On that note, Georgia is being sued by the Department of Justice for they're asserting that the passage of those recent voting restrictions that you mentioned, they say they violate the Voting Rights Act. So what's the latest on that lawsuit?
Well, we're continuing to push back. There's actually 9 people that sued us, plus the Department of Justice. They merged it all into one lawsuit. So now all these so-called nonprofits are piggybacking off the Department of Justice's unlimited financial resources. But one of the things that they're suing us on is having photo ID for absentee voting. And yet they've been using that same process up in Minnesota now for over 10 years. So go figure that one. It's things like that. We actually increased the number of days of early voting. We now have 17 days. President Biden's home state of Delaware has 10. And then you look at our record turnout that we had yesterday. You know, at the end of the day, it's almost silly if it wasn't so serious.
And you were able to win this primary, but do you have any concerns about other members of your party on the national and state level who continue to assert, without any evidence, of course, that the 2020 presidential election was somehow fraudulent? I mean, you do have people running for similar positions as yours. We saw a Republican gubernatorial candidate win his primary in Pennsylvania, who is a top election denier. He's someone who will pick the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania if elected. Do you have concerns about this in your party?
I've been focused on my race. I've been focused on Georgia. And so I really don't focus on the other states so much. I understand every state has different rules and regulations, but in Georgia, what we've shown, we're recognized by Heritage #1 for election integrity. And so we've have balanced the security and also accessibility, and that's really important. We have photo ID, plus we also now have 17 days of early voting. So accessibility with security, that builds confidence in the system. And that's why Georgia is the leader in election integrity. I think people could take a page out of our book. If you look at the hard work we've done in the 4 years I've been here, we now update our voter rolls objectively. If you move to other states that we share information with, you move to Texas or Florida or North Carolina and register there, they tell us. Likewise, we would return the same favor to them. That means we have clean, accurate voter rolls, things like that. And so Georgia is a model for election integrity.
And do you think that your victory in this Republican primary can, do you think that that message can get to those who are still claiming that the election was stolen? In other words, should your victory be a sign to them that voters are wanting to move on?
Well, I think people really are trying to move on. I think that truth matters, integrity counts. And I think that people are looking for honest people that'll stand up, follow the law, and follow the Constitution. I think that's what got validated yesterday.
And this Fulton County indictment, I want to ask a little bit about that. The Fulton County District Attorney's potential indictment of former President Trump over that phone call to you asking to find more votes. Do you know the latest in that investigation?
No, it's probably far-ranging, and they don't give us a heads up on what they're doing. I know that they have convened a grand jury, and they'll be bringing in people, and they'll be looking at all the people that were involved in the 2020 election. But I have a 10-page letter that Congress had. They've had it now for over a year. That's an open book there. Plus, I wrote my book, Integrity Counts, point-by-point rebuttal of every allegation that was made. So all the data points that, from our perspective, are out there already.
And what do you still want to accomplish as Secretary of State?
Well, I want to make sure that only American citizens are voting in our elections. 4 years ago, I said that was one of my key goals, to making sure that only Americans vote in our elections. So I've done a 100% citizenship verification. But since that time, now we're seeing that New York City is going to have 800,000 non-Americans vote in municipal elections. Vermont has 3 cities. Maryland and Maine are looking at that also, in addition to California had started that 4 years ago. 80% of all Georgians believe strongly that only Americans should be voting in our elections, and that means that only Americans should be on our voter rolls. And we currently have a lawsuit from Verified Action that's attempting to stop us to do citizenship verification. And if we can't do that, then you end up with non-citizens on your voter rolls, and logically then, the next thing you know, they'll be voting. And 80% of all Georgians support me that only Americans should vote in our elections.
Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, thank you for your time.
Thank you.